All right, welcome back to the show. I have Josh Perry here today. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good. I'm glad you're here. I'm excited to dive into your story. The it's just an amazing story and I want all the listeners to hear it. So, do you want to give us we'll just dive right in. You want to give us your background, kind of your story, how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. And first off, I want to say I was just talking to my buddy Mitch on the way back home from golfing today, and he was talking to me about how excited he was that I was, hopping onto a podcast with you. And we were just talking about, how awesome we think you are because you've done a lot for this community that we're in. And then obviously we have a lot of similar friends in the space, and just getting to know you and your story and how much of an integral piece I think you play to it, and I think it's really awesome. So I wanted to say thank you for having me on and to be able to share my story. It's always an honor to share, but to be able to hang out with someone I consider a good friend now and getting to know over the years. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess so. Dang, my story. I feel like there's so many elements. And another thing you've inspired me is, I just finished up writing my book at the end of March, which this whole quarantine thing helped me actually like get in and like get it done. Like a chapter a day was my goal. And then when I realized I wasn't on a plane every other week to a different trip and things like that, I was like, man, I can get this done now. So I got that done. But I realized there's so many elements to my life, just like anyone's life, that we often oversee or miss and things like that. So to keep things, kind of contextualized for this conversation in short, um, if you don't mind, I'd like to just give like an overview and just see kind of where you'd want to go, because I've
Yeah.
kind of been I'm kind of rambling right now, but I've been learning more as I share, that I've gotten to a place where I before I was like, man, I really want to like share some nuggets of like what I've learned. But then every time I did that, I felt like people would take away things that I didn't see, even though I was trying to present them. So yeah, that's cool. I just cool to give like an overview.
Yeah. Why don't you do you want to start with just telling us kind of like, I guess really, I mean, this podcast is all about metabolic flexibility, nutrition, fitness, everything, lifestyle, everything, right? And really just my goal with this podcast is to teach people how to become as resilient as possible, right? Like that's kind of the end goal. Like you want to teach
Hmm.
your body, your mind to be able to bounce back, to be flexible, to build up this resilience, to build a badass. That's like what I try to share with my clients and get out of them, like bring the badass out of them and bring that resiliency out of them. So tell us a little bit about kind of maybe with that in mind, give us a little bit about your kind of where you came from, especially with um, maybe talk about your brain tumor and BMX and then how it got you to becoming a coach, maybe. I know
Yeah,
that's like probably the whole thing. It doesn't really narrow it down, but
for
just tell us.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I was born and raised there until I was 17, and I grew up playing, from t-ball to little league, basketball. Like every sport I could play, which was inspired by my dad. To this day, still plays as many sports as he can. So I was always active, and around 12 or 13 is when action sports really came into my life. I was about 11 when I started, wandering to skate parks with a skateboard, and it was really big back then. It was really becoming popular. But then when I was like 13, I believe, for Christmas, my dad got me my first real BMX bike that was meant for going on ramps. And that turned into a hobby that turned into a passion that took over. So come into sophomore year of high school, stopped playing basketball, which was the last team sports I was still playing, and BMX started to take over. Like it became an obsession of mine. And at the same time, I was going to a technical high school to be trained for landscaping, because I started working, I was about 14, 15 for a friend of the family. And I was, making really good money on Cape Cod, working on like $1 million homes. And for like a teenager, I was making enough money to, do what I wanted and fund my travels for competition. But then junior year of high school, I turned pro, started competing professionally, and then I got an ultimatum from my boss to pick between work and my dream, really. But what was interesting was the technical high school offered this co-op program come sophomore year, so we could go to work for 2 weeks, get credit for your trade that you're in school for, make money, and then go to academics 2 weeks. So it was like every 2 weeks you go back and forth. So when this ultimatum came, I was like, man, like I don't know, like at the young age, I was still aware that I didn't have this opportunity to pursue this dream later on. So my parents supported my decision, and I quit my job, dropped out of high school, moved 13 hours south to Greenville, North Carolina, about an hour and a half east of where I am now. And I had an opportunity to train with Dave Mirra, who's like, for people that don't know BMX, he's like the Michael Jordan of BMX bike riding. And I was like, man, I have an opportunity to go train with him, all these other pros out in Greenville, and it was cheap to live there. I was paying like $250 a month for rent. And
Wow.
my parents supported my decision to drop out and move there. And because of that decision, I created a lot of success early on, to where I was riding X Games 2 years later, which is, at the time was the Olympics of our sport. Now, ironically, BMX is in the Olympics for freestyle, which is like the tricks, which got postponed because of coronavirus, which unfortunate, but we'll see where that goes. But yeah, it started, I was on TV, I was traveling the world, internationally for the first time. I think besides my uncle who was in the Navy, none of my family had ever left the continent. So I was like getting paid to live my dream, travel to see the world, meet amazing friends, and then had a great year. I was competing in the Do Action Sports Tour for the third year that year in 2009. X Games, like I said, and like all these things. And then come start of 2010, it was just a regular day training. And I was trying a new trick for the first time, and I overcompensated the rotation and the spin, or the flip and the rotation of the trick. And I got ejected off my bike, hit my head with a helmet, but still got a concussion, or I got knocked out. So I went to get an MRI. And that's when kind of like my life shifted and my perspective changed 180, because what I thought I was going in for a follow-up for an MRI scan because I got knocked out, to me it was routine. BMX is pretty common to hit your head. We try not to, but it happens. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, man, they're going to tell me like a week, 2 weeks off, it could be worse. And I'm sitting there in the doctor's office by myself because my family is in Massachusetts. I'm living on my own. And the doctor walks in, and his whole demeanor had changed at this point because he had the report. He asked me, "Hey, how you doing?" I was like, "Oh, in a little bit of pain, from the crash, but I'm just kind of anxious to get back riding. What's going on with the report?" And he told me that there was no swelling, there was no bleeding, so that was awesome. There wasn't any sign of traumatic brain injury. But then he went on to say, well, there's something else that showed up in the report. And at this time I stood up and I was like, all right, cool. Like, when can I ride? It's like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. You're going to want to sit down. I was like, all right, well, what's going on? And he's like, well, we don't know if it's benign or cancerous, but there's a large mass taking over the left side of your brain. And then he followed that up with, if you want a shot at living, you have to have surgery immediately, and there's still a chance you may not live, but then also be prepared to probably never ride your bike again. And in that moment, that was one of the best moments in my life, apart from being born. And people get confused when I say that. And really, I mean, it may sound cheesy, but we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But also, there's so many elements of my life that I wouldn't have been able to experience. My girlfriend Jackie, like, she wouldn't have been in my life. A lot of the experiences I've had and this passion for challenging the status quo of health wouldn't have occurred. And to be able to help inspire that perspective in other people, which is my main mission, is to challenge people's perspective of how they see the world. It wouldn't have happened had that not happened. So, I was really grateful for that moment. Now, at the time, I was devastated, of course. And, I know the story goes on. There's so many ways to go from there, but ultimately, that shifted my perspective of how I chose to see the world and how I chose to show up in the world. And it led me to optimizing everything I could one step at a time. Now it's been 10 years. What was it? A week or two ago, actually, was my 10-year anniversary from brain surgery. And lots of things have changed, but ultimately it's led me on this new path in life that a friend helped me understand was, I was on self for so long for, the BMX dream and to maintain that dream. And then this roadblock, stopped me. It was a wake up call, I say, and it put me on purpose, which is to help other people. And I think that's really profound. And I think that's one of the things that I value in what you do and what you represent, as well as many of our other friends in the space of trying to help people optimize their health. It's, be on purpose more so than yourself. So that's kind of when, my life just shifted from there. And then there's been other events that we can talk about that have happened since. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. I love that. So is that when you like, so I want to talk a little bit about your nutrition journey as well. So when did you, were you interested in nutrition at all before this happened? Like what was your kind of life before that? Was it?
Not at all. To me, food was just fuel. The cheaper and the tastier, the better. I was 17 when I started living on my own, so anything that I could afford was best case scenario for me. And so there was a lot of signs, that my health was declining, but I didn't see it that way. I just thought, oh, I just got to work out more, or, I just got to, just push through the pain. And I forgot to mention this, but the year leading up to that diagnosis, I was having classic brain tumor symptoms. I never thought of it because I wasn't aware. I didn't know, but I was having these debilitating headaches and migraines to the point where I was losing my vision some days. I was vomiting so bad that my friends had to drive me in. And every time I'd ask for a scan, I didn't know better. I was like, shouldn't we do like an X-ray, CAT scan, MRI, something, because I'm suffering, but you guys are telling me I'm fine. And they would deny me every time. And they'd say, well, you're healthy, blood work checks out. There's nothing really, abnormal here. You're in shape, you're young, you just have headaches. And they would prescribe me pain pills every time. And, I like to say I didn't have a pain pill deficiency. I had something internally wrong. And that's where my belief of health being internal was founded. And so that diagnosis was that spark or that catalyst to really challenging what I was being told. And what, at the time we were all aware that, so-called foods are unhealthy, but we didn't know the degree. At least I didn't know the degree. I just was like, oh, we know McDonald's is bad and candy and soda is bad to live off, but I didn't understand how much. And my physical, my cover didn't show, any declined health. But it was I think it was like after I got done recovering at the end of that year of 2010, a friend showed me a documentary that made so much sense to how food directly affects our health and our performance. And that's when I started, being like, man, like this makes sense. Maybe I caused this. And out of fear for wanting to come back, I went all in and I just started researching as much as I could. I got obsessive to where I was afraid to eat anything because I learned to turn into sugar, and then sugar fuels cancer and tumors and all this stuff. And so I lost like 30 pounds on accident because I was afraid to eat. But that was the moment that it shifted my perspective on food, and it led me to where I am today with being like a nerd about human health and nutrition and things like that.
Gotcha. So how long ago would you say was like when you started getting real, like when you lost 30 pounds? Like I kind of want to just like get the timeline so I can get a little bit more of an idea.
Yeah, so March 2010 was when I was diagnosed. April 2010 was when I had the surgery. It was a really quick process. And actually, my surgeon moved patients out of his schedule to get me in sooner. It was, I mean, if you see my MRI, I'm sure it was massive, which is really crazy to think I was riding X Games and didn't know I had that the whole time with the size that it was. Um, but then 2 years later, a second diagnosis occurred because they found when they went in for the original surgery, the tumor had wrapped around the artery, like the main artery in my brain and my optic nerve. So they couldn't risk hitting either of them for many reasons, or risk factors like paralysis. I could have gone blind, I could have had a stroke, I could have just bled out and died there. So that was 2 years later. We went through gamma knife radiation therapy to basically zap them, and the two areas that grew back shrunk for 4 years. They've been stable ever since. But then it was to the end of 2013, I read Grain Brain by Dr. David Perlmutter, and that's when I was like, man, like all this so-called healthy food I've been trying to eat isn't enough, because it's a lot of the things I was eating were raising my blood sugar even more that I didn't know. I was eating all these juicing all these foods and, eating all this and that. And then it was into early 2014 when I started getting fearful of pretty much, I didn't understand, the mechanisms. But I was like, man, like it sounds like everything turns to sugar eventually in our body. That's going to fuel this thing from coming back again. And it came back twice. So I don't want it to come back again. So it was that year. That was a big turning point for me when my friend looked at me. He's like, one of my best friends, he's like, Josh, you look like you're sick. And I was like, I don't know what to do, man. And then that's when I started, kind of going down that blood sugar route, and then eventually, the keto route and things like that.
Gotcha. So have you been keto low carb for like probably, you said 2013, so like almost eight, oh my gosh, I can't do math. Seven
Yeah, I'd say
years?
I'd say like around. So I've been low carb, high fat since finished reading that book. So like early 2014. So around like 6 years, and I say I have followed a ketogenic diet. But I say like I only started testing my blood beginning 2017, which was because, or was inspired by a third brain tumor diagnosis. So Grain Brain was like, it like taught me about blood sugar control, and he mentions keto and ketones and ketogenic diets in there, but it didn't stand out enough. I didn't comprehend it enough to take it into consideration to apply it fully. But thankfully I got introduced to Mark Sisson and his work around 150 grams of carbs a day or less, especially if you're an athlete, you're going to probably be burning fat. And so I was like, I started getting to tracking macros at the end of 2014 and 15. And I was like, all right, if I just eat 150 grams of carbs a day or less, I'm good. And then let's avoid alcohol, which you asked about my diet earlier. I forgot to mention this. When I was 17 till about 22, 23, I just lived off of sugar and copious amounts of alcohol. Living in a East Carolina university in that town, didn't go to college, but I participated in the after at the nightlife and all that stuff. I'd train hard and then we go party hard, which is really sad to think about how much alcohol I consumed back then and the effects on my brain. But yeah, it was 2014 when I actually started implementing a high-fat, low-carb diet. And then around 2016, maybe end of 2015, I started experimenting more with a ketogenic approach. But I was really shy about sharing it because I was insecure. I didn't believe I knew enough to be able to regurgitate why I was doing what I was doing. But then 2017, third diagnosis in February 2017 came, and I was like, man, they told me they think it's a genetic disorder that's creating, because they were said to be benign, not cancerous or malignant. And I was like, man, I remember Dr. Perlmutter talking about epigenetics. I've heard about this more and more. Ketones have this ability to maybe turn on genes in our favor and suppress them. And that's when I went all in, started testing my blood, started, doing my research, learned about Dr. Dom and Dr. Lowery, and then just started, one thing after another and reading one book after another. And then so it's been about 3 years now that I've actually been testing my blood. Know I can make ketones, probably was before, but I don't know. Yeah. So I just say about 3 years now. So it's been an interesting journey.
So have you been super strict keto for the last 3 years, or do you kind of, because obviously this podcast we talk all about metabolic flexibility and implementing keto, and depending on who you are and what your goals are. And a lot of times the clients that I work with, their main goal is just to be overall healthy and probably have some body composition goals, right? Whereas for you, it's like you're trying to prevent or treat something that's I would say more serious. So what's kind of have you been strict keto, and do you maybe want to talk about some of the benefits to ketones and brain health, if some of our listeners don't know much about how those relate to each other? Maybe a little bit of a background.
For sure. No, I love the metabolic flexibility thing. I think that's the ultimate goal with following a ketogenic approach for people like ourselves that, even though I live with, technically 4 brain tumors today, they're not malignant and I don't have seizures. So to me, it's not as severe as someone like you've probably heard me talk about my friend Miles. He battles drug-resistant epileptic seizures. So for him, it's a little bit different. Someone else with a different case. For me, it's a lifestyle, and it's a way that I know I'm preserving my brain's health and the integrity and keeping it resilient and optimizing how it performs. So 2015, when I started getting more and more into Mark Sisson's work and the 150 grams of carbs or less day, the fat burning curve he had back then, that's when I really started getting dialed in on my macros. And I was very, very strict of following them. I had notebooks. I got a little too carried away for about 2 years. But that ultimately allowed me to be able to eat intuitively now, eyeball things, where I still will weigh out my protein and stuff. Just tonight I weighed out about 10.5 ounces of ribeye after not eating for 24 hours. I just wanted to see. But going into 2017, that whole year of actually implementing a ketogenic approach and testing my blood, I was still really strict on my macros. But then the last few years, or 2 years technically, I've just been, I know I can make ketones. I know my body can burn fat efficiently, and I've tested if I have sweet potato or if I have this or that, my body responds now. Back then, I don't know what it was doing. I wasn't testing, didn't even know about testing my blood sugar, that you could do it at home. I just thought that was something you do at the doctors. So personally, I'm not that strict on my macros per se, but a non-negotiable for me is, and with my circumstances and the experiences I've had, is not eating food I know is going to destroy my body. So the keto police are going to come out and be like, oh, sweet potatoes, if you're eating them in abundance and this and that, which, I mean, to everyone's goal, it depends, but for me, I don't even eat starchy foods really anymore. I mean, I definitely don't eat grains, but once in a while, I'll have wine, I'll have pizza, like glutinous pizza, but it's not
Yeah.
gonna be even a regular thing like monthly. That's because I know better. And for me, I've been to the point now where I'm like, it wasn't even that good. We made fathead dough pizza the other night, and that was
Yeah.
satisfying. But that's my perspective. And so the metabolic flexibility thing, that's also what I try to teach my clients about as well. Is like, you don't need to be keto forever. If you're, in Miles' situation, that may be something you want to consider. But ultimately, you want to rejuvenate your mitochondria to a point where you can use different energy substrates without storing them as fat and causing free radical damage and inflammation. Like, that's, to me, the ultimate goal. And that's what I appreciate about what you promote,
Yeah.
is getting your body to just be able to regulate different energy sources at different times and not, go against you. Have your body work for you rather than against you.
I love that. Love that. Can you say that one more time? Because I just want our guests to hear just that, what you said about our mitochondria, just so they,
Oh, that's the ultimate goal, I think, of keto. Why it does so many things, it's directly affecting the mitochondria's performance, and you're optimizing them. And then, you get mitochondrial biogenesis, you're creating new mitochondria and all these things. And that's ultimately what you want. You want to be able to handle
Mhm.
different substrates at different times without storing them as fat, without creating free radical damage and inflammation.
Yeah, I love that. Sorry, I just wanted I wanted to
Oh,
repeat it, or wanted you to repeat it because that is like the main goal of metabolic flexibility is like being able to utilize these different fuel sources, and also like you said, focusing on foods that are whole foods mostly, like sweet potatoes and things like that. But then for someone who is just looking to get healthy and isn't treating anything underlying issues, having that cookie once in a while or that piece of regular pizza once in a while and being able to just bounce back, right? And not make it a regular thing. Not having that as a regular thing, but having that something that you can enjoy, everyday life, right? In the world we live in, right? There's pizza on every corner and garbage all over the place, but I always say that home base should really be like that lower carb intake, like you said, the 150 grams or below. And that's kind of how I personally like to live. Like that's my home base. Um, and yeah, I just think everything you said, I agree with 100%. So I want to get into a little bit of like where you are now. With you talked about you work with clients as a coach. So do you want to like give us a little bit of background on how you got into coaching?
yeah. So I never thought that it would turn into what I do today. But it was 2014. I enrolled in this online nutrition school called the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And for me, at the time, I was going crazy with all the conflicting information I was learning on the internet. And so I was like, oh, here's a structured format that I can learn, and I can be able to share this information with other people, because I was also being challenged with the things I was sharing. Oh, well, why? How does that work? And I didn't know enough, and that was a big insecurity that led me down this path of really understanding the complexities on even a basic level of what mitochondria are and how they produce free radicals, things like that. And so I went through that. It was a year-long program, got certified as a holistic health coach, continued competing, and then it was the end of 2018, no, 17. I got a call. I had just, quote unquote, retired from competition 2017 after the third diagnosis. And I had this wake up call to be able to get more on purpose of helping people with what I was learning and implementing and the success I was seeing. So I had stopped competing. I had stopped doing BMX shows, and I got this call about September 2017 from a friend of mine who does, these choreographed action sports shows around the country at amusement parks and for corporate gigs. And she's like, Josh, we got this corporate gig coming up February 2018, and they have this theme this year called No Limits, and they wanted us to find an athlete that kind of fit this theme. And I thought of you first. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. It's a 1-day gig, a corporate setup. We're going to be building ramps on stage, and it ended up being in the San Diego Hilton that I was just at again this year, but
Mm-hmm.
this time as their health coach. And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. So he's like, all right, cool. Well, the EVP of the company wants to interview you and the production manager of the event. So are you free? I was like, yeah, cool. All right. So we talked for like 45 minutes, and he just interviewed me about my life story. And then we talked about, my passion for nutrition and exercise and mindset and consciousness and BMX and all this. And when we got done, he was like, hey, do you do any kind of coaching? And in my mind, I was like, oh, man, no, I haven't yet, but I do have a certification. And so instantly I was like, yeah, of course. And he's like, all right, what do you think about coaching me and 3 or 4 other of my teammates leading up to the event? So we, at the time, I think we had a little over 3 months. And I was like, yeah, sure, sounds good. And that's kind of where it got kicked off. And then I ended up with a booth at their event as one of like the quote unquote sponsors, but they gave it to me for free for, helping them out. And I was performing there. And so that's just what really, kicked that off. And then it just became, part of what I do today, among a bunch of other things. And to me, it's just 100% aligned with my purpose to help people, because considered, an educator or thought leader, whatever you want to call it, it's really interesting, because being a high school dropout and now helping people learn things that I think should be fundamental in school, it's really, really interesting, at least to say, but it's amazing. But yeah, it was that opportunity that I almost shied away from, but I just blurted out yes, and here we are.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love what you said about like the education piece of it. And I think that, especially with nutrition, just being educated on everything is so important. And then also like staying educated yourself. So like for any coach out there, I truly believe, and this is like what I found for myself, like if I start to get off my game and not like I have at least an hour every single day, that's quote unquote learning time. Now it's like 2 hours because I have a morning routine that includes it, but then I also have an afternoon time. But anyway, I just think that like learning and understanding all of these different things, because everything's evolving, especially with nutrition, there's just like so much to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there is like this overall basis, like obviously, um, probably the optimal human diet is just eat real food. Like if it
Yeah.
comes from the earth, eat it. It's probably good. If it doesn't go through any processing or anything like that, then you're probably good. Like that's the simplest form. But then there's other things that we, have to understand. And the deeper you get into it and the obviously the specific goals you have, the more specific you have to get. So I love that you're all about education as well. So that's cool.
And the thing about what you just said too, at the end of the day, we should just eat real food. And that's 100% true, except for our environment as us, as a human being, internally and externally, has changed dramatically over the years, that you can't just eat real food because people's metabolism have been damaged so much. And like some people, that's why carnivore does so well for some people, and keto does so well, and paleo and
Mhm.
vegan, like all this stuff. Well, actually, I don't believe in vegan, but believe that destroys your brain. But
Different,
but that's
different
for another
topic.
time. But what's interesting is the context behind the individual's goal and purpose of why they want to do something. And I meant to say this earlier, but the reason I follow a ketogenic approach is for my brain's health and performance. I don't have a weight loss journey. Like I realized I had a lot of inflammation that made me a little pudgier back then than I thought, but I still had a six pack. So to me, I was healthy. The doctor said I was healthy, I'm fit. But once I started learning about the brain health effects of ketones themselves, and then understanding that all those TBIs and concussions I've experienced over the last 10, 15 years of my life, when you hit your head, glucose uptake goes down, but MCT transporters go up. Learning that, and then, oh, but if I'm not making ketones, my brain is starving. That really is what connected it for me and made it a passion and a lifestyle to me, to where I don't have a problem. Like people are like, oh, like how do you, why you just can't live and enjoy your life? I'm like, I thoroughly enjoy the way I eat because
Yeah.
I'm not hungry anymore and I'm not binge eating. I didn't realize that I had an eating disorder back then, like just lived off of sugar. I was addicted to sugar. And so
Hmm.
now I have the quote unquote willpower, because I'm liberated from cravings because of the underlying, mechanisms that are turned on now. So I just enjoy it, but it's all
Yeah.
around helping my brain perform. And so when I work with a client or someone comes to me, a stranger, just advice, first thing I ask, like, what is your goal? Because keto can be a tool for you, or it can be
Yeah.
a lifestyle. It depends on how you approach it. And there's also many, many ways that you can reach ketosis, which is the ultimate goal of keto. It's not just something you do on the weekends or during the week,
Yeah.
so it's just, I think it's very important to understand what the goal is and the purpose around that goal. And then, what are you trying to accomplish, down the road? And maybe you'll enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy it. Like, I mean, I was
Yeah.
even doing fasted sessions on my BMX bike. Sometimes just fat in my coffee as like a, pre-workout, and then sometimes it's 100% fasted, and so it works well for me, but not everyone experiences that. But that's also why I think the metabolic flexibility thing is the ultimate goal, because if you're trying to mess with performance, you get all these
Mhm.
different variations of things you can try.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think what you said about, having keto as a tool, but also understanding that it's not just another fad. Like keto, many people hear and they're like, oh, that's just another like fad diet, but it's not. It's a metabolic state. And the thing that turned me on to keto, like, what is it? Are we in 2020? Okay, so in 2014, was that it was literally this metabolic state and you're producing this fuel that you could measure.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just another diet that I've done hundreds of other diets and testing out other things, but it was literally like you're changing the metabolic state of your body and your brain and your mitochondria and all of that. And so that's something that I think is super, like, it's that all comes back to the education piece again, too, like understanding that. But then also, like you said, exactly what you said, like when someone comes to me, it's like, okay, what's your goal? Like, what
Hmm.
is the goal? And let's use that to based off of what we, implement. And then also realizing that, it changes with time. Like your goals are going to change, and also you are going to change. What works for you might change, might have worked last year. Maybe it's going to change now. Like we're evolving. And then also what works for Josh might not work for me.
Yeah.
It's like, so, everything's so individualized. So I love what you said about the education and using keto as a tool. I do want to talk a little bit about exogenous ketones. It's something that I get a lot of questions about, especially on social media. So I want to kind of get your perspective because I know that you have dealt with exogenous ketones a lot. Like you use them for specific purposes. So can you talk a little bit about them? Maybe give our listeners a little bit of your background, why you use them, why you feel they're beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. And just to backtrack to what we were just talking about, one thing I wanted to say is keto is the quote unquote only diet that actually has a biomarker you can track to see if you're following that diet correctly for yourself. I think that's really profound to think about, and that I love bringing up because then people are like, oh, that okay, that's interesting. So yeah, that's just something I love sharing, is that it's something you can actually track. Like you said, there's
I love it.
biomarkers for that fuel source. But then in the context of exogenous ketones, um, I started to understand as I adapted more and more to this way of eating and living that my numbers were starting to go down in terms of blood BHB. And that's when I started learning more about keto adaptation. And I was like, oh, that's actually a good thing. And then I started learning more about, through Ryan and Jacob's work, specifically actually, of how ketones can help as a tool, but also for therapeutic purposes. And the one of the main reasons I consume exogenous ketones on top of following a low carb, high fat ketogenic approach to my diet is for the brain health effects. I have, and actually Ryan and I went through Dr. Daniel Amen's SPECT imaging, and we got a lot of data on how our brains function with and without exogenous ketones. Both of us follow a ketogenic diet as well, so we know our liver is making them. But it was that moment when he showed me that the ADHD that we all know I have and was diagnosed correctly this time vanished upon exogenous ketone consumption the third day doing the same test that we did on day one. And I was like, wow, okay, so there's this, cognitive thing that people talk about, this enhancement, but I don't feel things like a lot of people say they do, probably because the history of brain tumors, brain surgery, which is a TBI of itself, things like that. But to have the objective data in front of me showing that my brain was performing better, that was everything to me. So everyone has their own purposes for why they use exogenous ketones. Some people like to use it as a pre-workout. It helps with their workout performance. Some people like it because, it stabilizes their mood and things like that. There's a lot of things, it helps people suppress their appetite through a fast more. So then the fasting police are going to say, you're not fasting, but if it's helping you extend your fast and burn more fat, then that's beneficial depending on the goal. So there's so many elements. And when you and I were talking earlier about this conversation, and I was like, man, like, I wonder if I should have my notes out. But you already did an episode with Ryan, so there's plenty of information there.
Oh
But for me
yeah.
personally, it's for the mental and the mental health benefits, but then also the cognitive performance benefits of my brain. And then knowing that it's being fueled properly, whether I eat something that is technically not keto or not. I know with the lifestyle I follow, which is a ketogenic diet and exogenous ketones, that I'm doing my brain a favor from all those years of destroying it with hitting it and drinking alcohol and copious amounts of sugar.
Yeah, I gotcha. No, I love that. And I love that you said that, you follow the lifestyle. And I mean, most people listening to this podcast are kind of veterans in, well, not, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them are veterans in knowing like about keto and ketosis. So most of them know and realize that like, you can't just drink ketones and eat pizza every day and think that they're
It's a
doing
huge
something.
pet peeve of mine.
Yeah. So I think that's where the exogenous ketones kind of like all of the different brands out there and supplements out there, that's where it gets like a negative kind of connotation for some people. Do you want to talk? You don't have to go into the details and the science and all that, but maybe just mention why, like the different. There's so many different brands out there with ketones, right? Like, is
Mhm.
there specific exogenous ketones that are say better than others, or what should people look for, I guess, when they maybe want to try out exogenous ketones?
For sure. And just a little background of my journey with exogenous ketones. So I was coming from the perspective of Dr. Perlmutter's work. So for people that may not be aware of who he is listening to your podcast, definitely go research who he is. But for me, he was a fundamental reason why I live this lifestyle and why I'm where I am today. And so learning about his approach with, like, at the time there wasn't exogenous ketones available, and all the keto products that are available today wasn't around back then. So to me, it was like real food. Like, I was an advocate for real food. And so when someone was trying to promote exogenous ketones to me, I was like, oh, that's a shortcut. I don't need that. My body makes them. I'm testing them now. And I was put off to them for about a year, and then learning how they have a lot of properties to them, especially if you get the bioidentical form, which I believe Ryan talked about with the whole key
Mm-hmm.
analogy. And that's one of the biggest factors of why I choose the brand that I choose, which is the brand Prove It. They get a lot of bad rep because of their business model, I believe, and that the people that are promoting them incorrectly have pizza but drink ketones. You're in ketosis. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much context missing behind that. It's actually damaging and very harmful to people. It's something I'm going to get worked up about right now, but I'm very passionate about it because it gives keto and ketones a bad rap because people are miseducated, or they're super out of line with their integrity and they're trying to make a dollar. And that's something that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't settle right with me. But that's why I was put off from using them for so long, because I was like, this is just a shortcut. I don't need this. I'm doing the work. But then I started learning about adaptation, and I was like, oh, well, my numbers start dropping, and I know the number in your blood correlates directly to how much your brain is actually using for fuel, and it helps my brain. So like, maybe I'll add them in. And then I started learning about the adaptation that they help the body induce even more, and all these other things with epigenetic factors and suppressing inflammation and free radical damage, but also improving internal antioxidant production. I was like, man, like, there's so much to this that it's sad that some people don't know and they're just promoting it incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that being said, I finally, because of education, was like, oh, let me get a try. And then for a while, I wasn't feeling anything that, my friend Mitch, you'll have to talk to him someday. He's a trip, but we gave him some ketones that he just turned into a new person. But he has a different path than I do with traumatic brain injury, but other things. And I was like, man, all right. So you're fired up, and that's what sparked me really to want to get the research done with Ryan and Dr. Amen, was to see what's going on in my brain. And that's when I was
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, I'm not just acting on faith of what I'm learning. This is actually doing something. Just because I can't feel it doesn't mean it's not working. So that was like my journey with it. So now what I've learned about the bioidentical form, and like the whole D versus L thing in keto mastery, I didn't know this, but going through Ryan Jacobs' course, that the L form, which is the majority of ketone supplements on the market, can actually resynthesize into fatty acids, which is not what you want. And so when
Mm-hmm.
you have the D form, it actually produces energy, which is what you want. It doesn't get resynthesized back to fat. So those types of
Yeah.
things. And then the whole, I think Ryan talked about this, but the competitive inhibition. So if you have two keys trying to fit in a lock, what's going to happen? Nothing's going to happen. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a determining factor of when I chose what brand I wanted to consume and use. It was because I wanted the dollars I was investing in it to actually work for me, not just be buying expensive salt, which is my perspective on
Mm-hmm.
a lot of brands that, kind of market ketones, but they're not really doing what you think. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just kind of like my background with it and my perspective on why I choose to use Prove It's exogenous ketones and why I use them in general, even though I follow Ketogenic Diet.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, So one, I will link the episode with Ryan in the show notes just so our listeners can go back and listen to that. He talked about in more detail kind of like the science of ketones and the D versus the L form if listeners don't understand what we're talking about. But another thing I just want to mention is like not one time in your whole explanation of exogenous ketones did the word weight loss or fat loss come out of your mouth. And
Yeah.
that is what I love because that is the misinformation, right? People 95% of people see these or the marketing that you talked about and they're like, oh, this is a quick fix weight loss, so I'm just going to take them. And that's where the bad rep has kind of come with exogenous ketones.
Exactly.
So I think I
They do
love your
help though.
perspective.
They help with other
Other,
mechanisms, let's say.
yes, exactly, yes. So there's other mechanisms that help exactly what you said, but they're not just a magic weight loss. Like you don't just drink ketones and like shed body fat. That doesn't happen. And I think a lot of
Oh,
people
yeah.
understand that, but
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like I love that you're taking the perspective of, okay, I'm using these to fuel my brain and my body and all of that versus I'm using these to, you know, try to lose weight, which is what the majority of people I feel like when they talk about ketones, the majority, not everybody, but
Yeah.
when they see when
Well,
they're new kind of to the lifestyle, maybe. Or what do you
oh
think?
yeah. No,
Yeah.
100%. And I think because when people learn about keto on the surface and ketones and fat loss, and majority of people, I believe, that get into keto, their goal was maybe body composition. They wanted to remove fat. So when they learn, oh, keto is actually ketosis, which is burning fat and making ketones show up in your blood. If I drink ketones, then I'm burning fat, right? And I see these things as like this, drink my fat burning or buy my fat burning drink, and it's like, no, it doesn't really work that way because that's not how it works. But for me, even
Hmm.
more lately, um, especially thanks to Ryan and Jacob with Keto Mastery and learning more in depth of the mitochondrial aspect of it and why people may be able to drink ketones and they don't see the other things that are changing that they're not aware of because it's a subtle change where they're not maybe as, their appetite suppressed because we know ketones can suppress
Hmm.
ghrelin to a degree. So they're not likely to crave things or binge on things, or maybe they get satiated quicker. So they're eating less calories in general. So then therefore they're burning more fat, but then also the fat adaptation process because they're creating more mitochondria. All those things, like my main perspective, whether someone's coming to me for help to lose weight, which I'll first like to say, no, you want to remove it. You don't want to come back. So we're going to
Yeah,
drop the word
yeah.
lose.
Fat
But
loss.
it's
Yes.
like, yeah,
Fat
there you go.
remove. Remove fat.
Yeah, fat removal.
Sorry.
There you go. But it's like what when you focus on prioritizing your brain's health and performance, you got to understand everything else is a ripple effect or a byproduct of doing so. I learned that the hard way, which is what fuels my passion for this lifestyle and sharing with other people. It's like I don't want people to learn the way I learned, which is through pain and suffering, because I believe that you can learn through gratitude and inspiration. You can change something. So rather than coming to do this, let's look at prioritizing what really matters. Your brain is like your operating system. If that's
Hmm.
suffering, everything else is going to show that. And for me, it was showing kind of visibly through inflammation, but it was also internally in my brain, ironically. So that's just something I love sharing too, because there's so much misinformation. That's why I love what you do. I mean, you wrote a book about it. I mean, that's phenomenal. And it's just really educating people so that way keto, which it won't, but it doesn't get to fad status, which 9 times out of 10 it's because someone heard something on Facebook or their friend said something or they don't understand electrolytes and they had a terrible experience the first 2 weeks, so they quit. Because really what that's doing is that's lowering people's performance because it's lowering people's ability to improve their brain function, specifically at a mitochondrial level. And that's like my favorite thing about it. So yeah, it has nothing to do with burning fat. That's a consequence when you prioritize your brain and you get your blood sugar under control.
Yeah, I love that. And I love, and you're so right. Like it all comes back to the brain. Like everything we do, what we eat on a daily basis or how we think about food or how our hormones are functioning, like it all comes back to the brain. Like the signals are going back and forth. Our hormone signals, you talk about ghrelin, leptin, all of these things are signals that signal our brain to fire different, whether we're hungry or we're satisfied or whatever it may be. And so that's something that we also have to think about too. Like your brain is exactly what you said. That's your operating system. And I actually became a little bit more interested in that recently because have you ever heard of the book The Hungry Brain by Stephen Guyenet?
Jackie just bought it after I think it was like a week or two. She saw it in your story, so it's
Oh,
on the
just thought it
bookshelf.
was, yeah. I just finished it like last week. It took me a while to read because I read like two books in the same day. So it's like I read like 20, 30 minutes of the book. So it takes me a while, but I really like to focus on that. But anyway, it's not the point. And I'm a slow reader. But it was like just very eye-opening because everything comes back to the brain, like literally everything. So I mean, it's everything you just said, and it's very just intriguing to learn about and educate yourself about these things and realize that, yeah, I mean, the book is a little bit sciencey, but it just makes sense after you understand it. You'll realize, okay, that's why I ate that thing
Hmm.
before. You know what I mean? Like it all stems from your brain. And yeah, so it's just fascinating to me.
No, 100%. I
Um,
mean, even when you
yeah.
get into the NLP section and of psychology and then the subconscious, like Dr. Joe
Hmm.
Dispenza has been one of my favorite people to learn from his work the last few years. And it's changed my life to where I just hired an NLP coach that does a lot of amazing things. And it's just like any other coach. It's just something that, I find has been like the missing piece for my life. And I'd say like nutrition was first, thanks to the brain tumor diagnosis. Blowing out my knee in 2013, which is how I met Jackie 2 years later, riding on a torn ACL meniscus for 2 years and just damaging the hell out of my knee, taught me the power of strength training and the importance of it out, like exercise in general, beyond just my sport of BMX, opposed to what people think. Not all action sports athletes take that seriously. So now it's changing, but
Hmm.
that piece. And then 2016 or 17 is when I got introduced to Dr. Joe Dispenza and Kerwin Ray and like learning about these psychology pieces. I was like, man, like I've been learning these things subconsciously, and BMX taught me like when you fall down, you get up, you try again if you want something bad enough. And it taught me how to be resilient. My mom and her journey battling colon cancer, and my family just teaching me to work hard, like all these things developed who I was to be able to overcome that brain tumor diagnosis, to not be a victim to my circumstances, but see as an opportunity to create moving forward, which is what I'm a big believer now, especially now that I'm so aware of it. So when we're talking about the brain, it's not just nutrition, it's not just exercise, it's also your thoughts. And so
Hmm.
I've actually been moving more and more out of like researching keto specifically because that's just one piece. And so where now I'm like, I hired an NLP coach and I'm like reading psychology books as my homework, so I think that's really important to bring up. It's like that book. I'm excited to read the book that you just mentioned, that The Hungry Brain, that Jackie just
Hmm.
bought. So that'll be after, I'm finished with my homework. But I just love like all these pieces because it's the mind and the body that work together. And it's just, you can't have one without the other. Just like you can't outrun a bad diet. Like you can't, out eat your thoughts. Like if you're having, bad thoughts, or you have these circumstances that you don't think are really having an impact in your life, they are, because your
Hmm.
subconscious, knows, like it memorizes everything. But if you're not aware of the autopilot programs that you're running, which we all are, then you may, it may take you a while to get to your goal, or you may not get to your
Hmm.
goal. That's the difference. So yeah, I love that. I'll check out that
Yeah.
book as soon as I can.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and everything you just said is exactly kind of how I've evolved too. Like I got super interested in keto and was just like diving into everything keto, and now it's like nutrition is super important, but mindset stuff. I said like it sounds like it's not that big of a deal, but it's the biggest deal. But I've been so, interested in all of that, like you said, and that's one of the reasons why I got that book, and just focusing on not just nutrition, like all the lifestyle things, all, like mindset and meditation and journaling and all these things that people kind of don't, that feel like, maybe it's just a waste of time or doesn't matter. Like those things are important, and becoming in tune with that has completely changed my life. So yeah, I think it's everything you said. I completely agree with.
I mean, what we
Um,
choose to put in our minds is the single most important thing beyond what we choose to put in our mouths every day. That's a choice we have every single day. We may be able to fast for 1 to 7 days or longer,
mhm.
but you have a choice every single day of what you put in your mind, whether it's the conversations you have, the content you consume, the thoughts you form. If you're not aware of them, they can start to take over your life. And I've seen it happen in my life and other people's lives. So that's something really important to understand, is like we have a choice of what we put in our mouths, just the same way we have a choice what we put in our minds, and that's going to dictate our reality moving forward.
I love that. I love that. And it doesn't just like come to you, right? You have to work on this. You have to work on, working on your mind and positivity and educating yourself, reading books, listening to podcasts about these things. Kind of, we think about nutrition and exercise, and we have to exercise to build muscle. You have to, learn and educate yourself to build up that resiliency, especially within your own mindset and your own goals and all of that. So I love that. So we're about an hour in. So I usually end with a question for my guests. So has there been something that you've changed your mind about in the past year and why?
Yeah,
Is that
it'd
a
probably
question?
be,
Did
yeah,
I form
no,
that
for
as a
sure.
question?
No, I definitely, I think it was, or I understood you. Either way, it works.
Okay.
But I think one thing that has changed in the last year specifically is that what we talked about earlier, keto being a tool, it doesn't have to be an end all be all. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've come to understand more consciously. It's like it's not just something you have to do forever. But then, I mean, I don't know.
Mhm.
Like I keep learning more and more about the power of our mind and the stories we tell ourselves and we give energy to. So, dang, that's such a hard question. But I would say it's probably just
Right.
understanding that anyone can benefit from following a ketogenic approach for however long they want. Just
Mhm.
yeah, probably that.
Love it. Love it. Sorry, I kind of butchered the question. I'm so used to asking the question, and then I just forgot how I asked it, but I love it. I love it. So I have one last question for you. If you had a superpower, what would it be?
If I had a superpower, I'd probably want to be able to instill belief in everyone to be able to accomplish the things they want in their lives, not to give energy into the noise, as I call it, the distractions, the influences, because at the end of the day, we choose the reality we want to live in, and that's going to dictate the choices we move forward. That's going to manifest that reality. So just be able to instill the belief in everyone.
Awesome. I love it. That's a great superpower. Love that answer. So thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation. I loved hearing about your story. I've heard it many times, but I definitely learned some new things about you, and I hope our listeners took away a lot of good, I know they took away a lot of good information from this episode. Do you have anything fun? I mean, I know you have your book coming up. Is there like a timeline for when that's going to come out?
Not sure yet. I got to go through the editing and publishing process and all that good stuff. So that's the next project for Brian and I to tackle.
But it's like you're done writing.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote the like what I'm calling the rough draft. I don't know if that's the right terminology. I hear manuscript, I hear
Yeah.
all these things, but yeah. So I wrote it, and now it's just having someone help me clean it up, um, and see if it makes sense of the
Cool.
thoughts I'm trying to put together. So yeah, that's the next step.
Awesome, awesome. So, do you have anything else, like kind of on the horizon that you're excited about in the next few months or anything like that?
I'm excited to get out in the gym, get back bowling, which is another fun fact people don't know about me. I grew up bowling, and then when BMX took over, I took an 18-year hiatus. So, um,
Yeah, I've
almost,
watched your stories.
yeah,
I watched your stories, well, before all this
yeah.
coronavirus stuff.
Yeah,
But
it's fun. But yeah, I'm excited to get back doing that, traveling, hanging out with people like yourself, and just going to all
mhm,
the events. And yeah, just trying to get out there and speak more, which is something I never thought I would ever do. So that's been fun. But yeah, just continue plugging away at trying to help people and inspire the perspective that we can do what we want when we believe in ourselves. So yeah, that's
I
what all my
love it.
actions come down towards, trying to help serve people.
Awesome, awesome. So, can you tell our listeners where they can find you, social media, website, stuff like that?
Yeah, so all my social media, it's just at Josh Perry BMX. Most active on Instagram and Facebook, but then YouTube. Brian and I had taken a minute from posting videos, but we were getting into that. So yeah, Twitter, all that good stuff. And then joshperrybmx.com is my website. So it's all universal.
Sweet, sweet. I'll link that in the show notes so everybody can check them out. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I enjoyed talking to you as always. I hope you enjoy talking to me too.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure and it's my honor. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk and share my story with your listeners. And it's always great to catch up and hang out. So I'm looking forward to when we can hang out in person again.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully soon.
Yeah.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for
All
coming
right.
on.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.